is this fast cutting handheld camera. This is a technique that a lot of people now use in films, and most times I must say it's very often it's badly made, badly
It's becoming
done,
irritating.
irritating,
Yeah.
and I wonder how you find the kind of the exact how far you can go, because sometimes shots your editing is very fast, but I just watched to prepare this interview. I just watched the other day your two Bond films again, and you see that even if they are cut very fast, it's always clear what is happening. And in
Yeah.
most films now,
It's not,
you
yeah.
quietly don't understand who is shooting at whom and where they are standing,
Yeah.
and is that a big discipline to?
I think three things about that. I think that, you know, I was quite puzzled, you know, 6 or 7 years ago when my stuff started to work in the mainstream, and I sort of started to wonder why that would be, because most of the films all the films I've made have been very small and kind of about pretty obscure subjects like Bloody Sunday or whatever. You know, they were me, and I loved making them, but they weren't broad audience pieces. And also, I would have said that my style was quite, in a way, retro, quite old-fashioned, you know, and it threw back to my roots, which were in documentaries and, you know, the British social realist movement and things like that. It really only became clear to me why that was. I remember when we made Bourne Ultimatum, and I was shooting the Waterloo sequence at the start of that. And whenever we started filming, people would walk past and put their mobile phones up. And that's when I really realised, of course, because the sorts of images that I carried from my, you know, filmmaking youth, which I thought were old-fashioned, in fact, were quite similar to the images that kids were getting with these things, you know, which was for all this sort of stuff.
Yeah, very imperfect and very
imperfect in every way. But also, one other thing I would say, they associated those kinds of images, I think, with authenticity in an interesting way. In other words, I think that the culture, I'm talking now 6, 7 years ago, had become so heavily sort of homogenized. You know, politics was homogenized and modulated, moderated through, you know, the prism of focus groups and all the rest of it. You know, movies, television, they were heavily processed. And I think that gave, particularly a young audience, a thirst for authenticity. That's, I think, why reality television got going, because it seemed to kind of create a demotic experience that was authentic.
which is just the opposite, of course.
It's become so, but at the start I think it was. And I think that in a way it was the same with the sorts of things I was doing. They felt, and they hopefully, I can't speak, but you know, they were made in an authentic way.
And a language they recognize. Or
Yeah, I mean, I remember very clearly, for instance, that Waterloo sequence, that when I was planning Ultimatum, you know, we were coming back for the sequel. It was actually the third one, but it was my sequel, as it were. And I remember saying, well, here's the problem. We're now indisputably a big, huge movie. You know, it's been a big, successful franchise. But the shtick of the franchise is that it's anti-establishment and guerrilla and all the rest of it. So how do we stay true to those roots? And I remember saying, well, what we have to do is be forced into positions where we can't shoot like a big unit. Because the truth of any big movie is that the essence of the experience is to create a camp. You know, you create a big set, and the trucks all are there, and it becomes, you know, a laminate-only area, and, you know, it becomes a safe place and a plannable place where you can spend a lot of money and be sure it's all going to work like clockwork. But you pay a price for that, and the price is in the dead hand of it all being prepared.
Yeah, reality disappears.
Exactly. And so that's really the birth of when I said, well, I want to shoot these very, very long action sequences, kind of 15 minutes plus. I mean, the one in Waterloo was around about 18, I think. The one in Morocco was even longer, I think, and then the big one in Yule. And I want to shoot them in places where we simply cannot operate as a big unit. So, for instance, in Waterloo, we had a big unit, but it had to be parked 2 miles away on the other side of the South Bank. And we could only go on the station with, I think, 8 or 10 people and Matt and the other actor. And it was the same, obviously, in the market in Tangier, because you just couldn't, you couldn't close down. And ditto on the streets in New York. And it forced us to operate like a very small film, and I think that was a lot of what made it feel authentic. The problem today is that it's become ubiquitous, and what do you do?
It's become a cliché now.
It has become a cliche, yeah, big problem for me. I'm obviously going to need to come up with something new.
but
I'll shoot them like John Ford.
I can imagine that in that kind of filmmaking, that even more than in traditional visual language filmmaking, cutting, editing is even more important. You can probably do so much to destroy it, in fact, or create something. Is that true, or is it just another kind of editing, or is it there?
No,
the process of editing?
listen, editing is, particularly if you're moving at pace. I always believed, and I think it's true, the point about making something feel fast is that you can get it to a place where it's moving fast but it feels slow. And that's, I think, that's what I was aiming for in all those films. And I think that's why people enjoyed them, because you get to that sweet spot. In other words, your foot is on the throttle very, very strongly, but you're making such choices of accuracy that people are comfortable reading the detail. And that's a matter of judgment. You've got to make very, very fine decisions. And if you get it right, you can have this paradoxical experience on a big screen of something moving whiplash fast, but with perfect focus. Right? You can't just accelerate and just throw the cuts in faster and faster and faster. You've got to throw them in a way that the eye can absorb the meaning of them, and then if you can keep the clarity going, you can stretch it, and that's very, very. It's a fun thing to do.
What you say is completely, I think, completely true, and also you feel it yourself. Sometimes you can experience seeing like a bad action film that's very fast, but even if it's fast, it's very boring and it seems very long.
Yeah,
it's not because
of
it's
course.
fast that it gets.
Absolutely, it feels the reverse of what you're trying to do. And Chris Rouse, who cuts those films with me, a lot of our discussions will be modulating that. That's going a bit too. You're not. It's not feeling like a float. It's feeling like it's pressing in on you. You've got to judge it, and you can also only judge it on a big screen.